Hi, my name is Ben Halfon. I am the co-author of Our Happy Divorce, How Ending Our Marriage Brought Us Closer Together. Thank you for joining us tonight, today, this afternoon. As always, I am joined by my co-hosts, Kate Anthony. Oh my gosh. Kate Anthony and Susan Guthrie. Susan is the founder of Divorce in a Better Way and host of the Divorce and Beyond podcast. Susan is a top law attorney and mediator with over 30 years of experience. Kate Anthony is a divorce coach and literally a rock star. She helps women navigate through the tough decision of should I stay or should I go. Excuse me. She's also the host of the award-winning podcast, the Divorce Survival Guide podcast. So without further ado, please help me welcome Susan and Kate. Hi, guys. I think I got that right. I think I'm nailing it. Every week.
You got through all of the different names of the different things that we do.
Did I miss your podcast?
No, you got it.
I got it?
Divorce and Beyond.
Well, next week I'll fuck it up. Excuse my French.
No problem.
If first time you've joined us, I usually get Kate's podcast completely wrong and forget the word guide, I think. But
Never
I am
mind, it's one of the top divorce podcasts in the world. Never mind
award-winning.
that.
I'd never forget that part of it, or the rock star part of it.
Right? She really is a rock star.
She really is. But I'm super excited about our guest and our topic tonight. We're lucky to be joined by Julia Dennison. Julie is the digital content director of the Parents brand, which includes heading up the content for parents.com and its social platforms. A single co-parent mama to 4-year-old Esme, she's been writing and editing in the parenting space for over 10 years. With a passion for covering all the wonderfully unique ways, I got something in my throat, people parent and form families, she's been a co-host of the podcast Pregnancy Confidential, and now of the new podcast, We Are Family with Sean T. All about the diversity of family life has today. Sorry. She also appeared as a panel moderator and expert to the Parenting Beat for various events and TV segments, including those for Good Morning America, CNN, HLN, Yahoo, and other local news outlets. So please let me welcome Julia.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for that warm welcome.
Nothing like a good trigger. Hi, Julia.
Hi. How you doing?
We're doing. Thank you for joining us tonight. And the first and most important question I have for you tonight is actually from Nikki. And she really believes that you have some sort of magical powers because when we were on your podcast, you have been the only person that was actually able to shut me up and let her share some of the time. So she wants to know, and I'm pretty sure a lot of other people want to know, how the hell you pulled that one off.
Mute button.
Right. I should go on to moderate some presidential debates, I guess. Thank you.
Exactly.
No, I think probably going through divorce, huh? Topical. But you gotta be good at setting those boundaries, right?
Well, whatever boundaries. It was concise. For the first time ever, I was clear. I don't know if it was on the editing table or actually my medication was right that day. But it was clear, concise, on point. And so We Are Family podcast is celebrating families of all shapes and sizes, and it's a great podcast. Why'd you start it? And what's your motivation behind it and goal for it?
Sure. So I've been an editor over at Parents, and I oversee the digital content at parents.com for a while now. And I think working in the parenting space, even this, not even that long ago, a couple years ago, I felt like there was this perfect image of what a family looked like on Instagram. And I would always see that everywhere. And in my own personal life, I was going through a divorce. I divorced my ex when my daughter was 1. So it was sort of early on in her life, and my daughter's 4 now. And I just thought to myself, my family at home looks so different from so many of these families that I'm seeing on Instagram. And I started to feel a little bit guilty about that, or just kind of finding myself comparing my family to what I felt like a family should look like. And then I saw a statistic to say that non-traditional, non-nuclear families were looking to outnumber the number of traditional families as early as, 2021 or even 2020. And I started to realize that there are a lot of different families out there, and families can look like all different shapes and sizes, and there's no right family. And also, everything that people put on Instagram is totally, filtered BS most of the time anyway. So I thought it was, a good time to start a conversation about celebrating diversity of what families look like, just for selfish reasons, just to validate myself.
What is the perfect family in We Are Family or in Julia Dennison's world? What does it look like today, and how has that shifted from? I mean, not necessarily even the Instagram, but you can go beyond that, right? Man, woman, child, white picket fence. What does it look like today?
I started to realize that even though families can look so different on the outside, we all have a very uniting thing between us, and that is love. We all love each other. I mean, we all drive each other crazy, but we all love each other, and that's at the root of it. And I think it's cheesy, but I really do think it's love that builds a family. And I think that love can be like a romantic love between a married husband and wife, but I'm starting to also realize that love can be that platonic love, between an ex or co-parenting with even, or, you might have intergenerational families sharing one home, you might have grandparents bringing up their grandchildren. You might have sisters bringing up their, nieces and nephews. And so there's just all different ways that families are family. But at the same time, at the heart of it, it's all the same stuff, isn't it? But love, and that's what's important.
So, one of the price for admission here on this live stream is obviously we have the best lawyer money can buy, and we have the best coach money can buy, and now we have you as a been in the space and being an expert in parenting, but also have a personal experience around divorce and co-parenting, and so you could the podcast today is about divorcing right in order to parent right. And so how did you do that in your own life?
I had heard my father, my grandparents had a really nasty divorce, and I'd heard about that growing up. And divorce was such a bad word in my family, as I was growing up. So I always knew, and my dad always said to me, I wish that parents could go to divorce school. And that always kind of stuck with me long before I even had any kind of relationship, or long before I got married. So, I met my ex when I was in college, and I feel like I always say that our relationship kind of had an expiration date. I don't regret it, and it had its good moments. It just sort of reached a point at which we didn't want to be together anymore. And I realized that I was going down that path of divorce, and I remember my dad's words about how he wished that people could go to divorce school. And working in the parenting space, I'd seen so many studies about how important it was to co-parent equally, and I'd read a lot of books about it. And I just knew I wanted to kind of get divorce right. I felt like that was imperative to my daughter. And I mean, I'm sort of like type A anyway, so I feel like I'm like, how do I do this in the best way possible? And so it seemed to be all signs were pointing to the fact. And also I knew that I got along with my ex. Like, we kind of grew up together because we got together so young. I think of him almost like a brother. Like, he can drive me bonkers, but we're old friends. So I knew I didn't want to do that tradition. Everyone has the image of divorce in their head, like it's just this like nasty, horrible fight. And I knew I didn't have that in me, and I didn't want that. And I also knew that I wanted to give him equal access to my daughter as with me. And also reading your book, and there was another book I loved called The Kick-Ass Single Mom by Emma Johnson. And it really just talked about the benefit of equal co-parenting. And I started to read up more and more about that. And I realized it didn't have to be this like bad word, it didn't. And I know you can't really talk about Louis C.K. anymore because he's kind of canceled. But one of the things that I love that he always said is if you have friends that go through a divorce, don't say to them, "Oh, I'm so sorry." Congratulate them, because it's really freaking hard, and it's a tough decision. And I actually do feel proud that I went through that, made that decision, went down that path, and proactively decided to co-parent in a positive way and divorce positively, versus just kind of like, either stay in a marriage that wasn't right or let myself go down that tit for tat path. So, yeah.
So in your grandfather's spirit, I think that leads to the next question about divorce school. And Julia and Kate and Susan and I all chime in here. But, in divorce school, this, hypothetical divorce school, what can couples do to divorce right in order to parent right? What are some tips that you would give them, Julia?
I'd say don't sweat the small stuff and pick your battles, because think about what you're fighting for and think about whether it's worth the fight in that moment, or if you can just let it go. I think there's so much you can just let go that you might not even realize. So that would be my big tip.
Kate?
Well, I was going to say that's so hard, right? It sounds so simple, right? And yet I see over and over and over again with my clients in my Facebook group, we everything feels so big when it has to do with your children, right? And I think the hardest part of this is discerning what's a big deal and what's really not, right? Like, is it really that big a deal that they're late to school every day when they're with your ex? Or is it really that big a deal that they let them eat sugary cereal, or that they don't, is that a big deal? Or is it like, we're trying to potty train, and that's a big deal, right? We have to be on the same page about potty training, right? But, and discerning what matters that we're on the same page about, and really what you just have no control over. Right. And it's that powerlessness, and that I can't control what happens in the other house. And it can be so hard to let go of that control, especially when it's your kids. Right. And I think it's harder for moms. I think it's exponentially harder for moms, because we have this story in our heads that we're like the superior parent. Right. And that we kind of know. And man, it's tough. It's I think you're absolutely right. It's the most important thing, and I think it's the hardest.
Oh yeah, it's easier said than done.
Yeah, it's Nikki. I think it's either her. I forget, but it was one of those things where it sounds simple. It is simple, right? Put your ego, whatever. Don't pick your battles, but it doesn't mean that's easy. Like, those aren't two synonymous things. Simple and easy are completely separate. Where was Susan?
Yeah.
Divorce school.
Yeah.
What are we being taught at divorce school?
Well, I would actually just carry on what both Julia and Kate said, because it really does boil down to, if you want to call it a battle, picking your battles. The thing that I would layer into it is what you and Nikki did so successfully, Ben, is you remembered and put at the very top of the priority list what is actually the only important thing, and that was Asher. And so you filtered every decision about whether it was important or not, picking the battles, whatever it was, by what's best for Asher. And so I would, again, sounds easy, isn't an easy thing to do at all. But the one thing that would unite almost every parent that I've ever dealt with in a divorce, and that's hundreds and hundreds of people over 30 years, is that the one thing I can always get them to agree on is they love their child or their children. And so if they can remember that, I actually have them bring pictures of the kids into the mediation. I have them start the mediation or the divorce process telling me about their children in front of the other parent, so they can talk about, their children. If you can really honestly do what Ben and Nikki did so successfully, and I've heard them say it in conversation even to this day, well, that's what was best for Asher, or that's what guided. That's how you do it. And it's so easy to say, oh, well, that's what's best. I know what Kate just said about moms thinking, and that's a phenomenon. Moms thinking, well, I have a uterus, I am the better parent. That's not necessarily true, and it's not necessarily fair. Dads are parents too. When you talk about that's my child, it's their child too. I mean, flip it around. So in that triangle, it's always got to be the kid at the top, always.
the one thing that I love, and I think we've had this conversation before, but sometimes dads, and I'm the only guy here, so I can speak for everyone, but it is sometimes the second parent. Sometimes I got the feeling like I was that second parent, or a little bit below. And I know Nikki, and if she were here, I would say it to her, has some control thing. And it was hard for her to let Asher go to he was only 3 years old. I was scared, but you know what? He didn't die. He probably didn't do the same things at my house that he did at Nikki's, but he made it through, and I got home. He got home on time, and all that stuff.
And you got to forge your own path,
yeah.
Right? And I think that's what's so important is that, I'd been the stay-at-home mom, and when I got divorced, my son was 3, and I did feel like I knew better. I was like, I was the primary parent, and so I did feel I remember my ex saying to me one time, he's like, I have instincts too. You think you have like this mother instinct. Well, I have instincts too. And I was like, okay, but yours are wrong.
Yours suck.
Your instincts suck. But at the end of the day, when we got divorced, I had to let all of that go and let him find his way. And even in the ways that he was maybe not as practiced as I was, because I was the stay-at-home parent, he became more practiced.
Yep.
And he became he's a fucking great dad, and I don't think he could have been as good a dad as he is now if I hadn't taken my hands off of it and let him learn how to be a parent.
Yeah, and
we talk about that so much at Parents. We just did a spotlight on the mental load, and just in relationships in general, with parents who are together. So often the majority of parenting will fall on the mother, and I don't think that that's necessarily the dad's fault. I think, like, to your point, I think moms will often, we have the maternity leave, we might take more maternity leave, we spend more time up front with the baby, and then we start.
And you carry it for 9 months, yeah.
And then that little thing. But I always say that I think divorcing actually caused me to confront that mental load in a real way, and it ended up that I had a bit more of an equal share with my ex in parenting once we got divorced, because the boundary was so strong. Right. And I always say that the more you can just let them do their own thing in their own time, the better off you are. Because one of the things I find hard about co-parenting equally is that when I have Ezzy, I'm 100% on all the time. There's nobody to tag team. I was thinking yesterday, because it was because of daylight savings time, it felt like the freaking longest day of my, also just because of this week and everything. It felt like
it was the longest day ever.
It would not freaking end. I was so over it. I was over parenting from the minute I got up, but it's just me. And I was thinking, those are the moments where I feel sometimes jealous that I don't have somebody to tag team with, that it's just all me all day. But that means that I need that time when it's 0% me. Yep. So like 5%, because I still get those texts and things like that. But I need that time when I'm not parenting to recharge from those times when I am so impressed by people who are full-time single parents, because I don't know how they do that and not have the time to recharge, because I feel like I really freaking need that time. The more you can hand to them, the more of that time you'll have to yourself, is what I find.
Just a side note, if you look at my watch, it says 6:23. I am boycotting daylight savings this year, because the last thing I need is another hour in 2020. So I will not change my watch until January 1st.
The protest.
One of the things that you just brought up that made me think about, one of the things that we talk about in my story and what I had to come with grips with was I was nowhere near the father that I thought I was when I was married to Nikki. Because part of having a wife like Nikki, or a mom like Nikki, she likes to take on everything, and so it sort of made me a little bit lax in my duties. Push it off on Nikki. But through the divorce process, and all of a sudden I had this 3-year-old, I couldn't do that anymore. So it actually made me a better parent. It made me a better father, and completely different than what I thought I was. And so with parents, Julia, I know that with your experience and what you control on the digital side, is there more of a focus on co-parenting or blended families, or has it always been a big focus of yours?
I mean, I think that that there is more and more, because it's just definitely seems like it's more in the conversation and then zeitgeist, and people are realizing that, you know, that you can divorce better and you can co-parent and everything that comes with it. So we're covering that more and more. I mean, part of the nice things about being leading the content on parents is I get to kind of steer it a little bit. And sometimes I can't help myself. Like, I feel like if I've had an experience, and, you know, I do feel like I'm somewhat of the target demo of who we're trying to reach, then I know that if I've had an experience and I feel like it needs to be talked about, then there'll be other people out there that will be in the same boat. So I always try to kind of like lead our editorial from the heart and from, you know, my experience as well as talking to parents everywhere and seeing what people are really going through. But yeah, and I think, like, especially with something like divorce and co-parenting, it's a subject where the more we talk about it, the better off people are going to be, because they're going to feel like they're not alone. It can be so isolating. You know, we can talk forever about the perfect family, but who really wants to, you know, talking about that? And I do think that, like, I feel like I have a duty to help people feel less alone in their parenting as part of my job. So, and for me, divorce and co-parenting is such an important, potentially isolating topic that I want to make sure that we support our audience through. And common, so freaking common, right?
Absolutely. And if they're not going through it, so so many more are contemplating it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, especially right now in the pandemic, like the searches, you know, because we get a lot of search traffic and we watch search trends, and the searches around divorce and pandemic is just, which is understandable.
Yeah,
it's understandable. We get that question. Again, people reach out, same, I mean, in our small little world, but it's like the only advice, again, I don't know, Susan or Kate, you guys would probably are much more qualified to answer this question, but should anybody be making major life decisions with the pandemic going on, or with everything going on? I mean, I guess, Kate, you could answer this question best. There is obviously, you've been around that person more than ever. You know, you have all the stresses of life and the world we live in right now. How do you differentiate from real, you know, ending a marriage and, you know, circumstantial, I guess?
Absolutely.
I don't know if that's the right word.
Like, how much of it is we're all locked down and we're just sick and tired of each other, versus like, oh, I'm around this person more and I'm seeing them for who they actually are, and this doesn't work for me anymore.
Right.
And it's, you know, it can be a hard line to distinguish. I also see a lot that it's just people, their shit is like right here, you know, and they just can't avoid it anymore. You know, so many people who have been asking this question for so many years, now they're in lockdown and there's no escape, and they can't go to work and they can't go out with their friends, and there's no pressure release. And it, you know, it does bring things to a head. But you're right. I mean, there's some marriages that are just like, well, we're not meant to be like this, right? We are not meant to be all things to our spouses. We're not meant to be their best friend, their emotional support, their, you know, their psychological support, their therapist, their sex, you know, whatever, like on and on. Like, we just can't, not one person cannot, you know, fulfill all of that in another person. And we used to get a lot of those needs met in other places by other people when we were actually allowed to see other people and go other places.
Friends,
and really,
travel.
I think that, you know, what's reasonable and what's unreasonable, and what has the pandemic sort of like forced us into that may be even more unreasonable than normally. And it's, I mean, I think, like I said, for some people, I think it's a really simple, this is just now more in my face. And for other people, I think it really is like, you know, once the pandemic is over, will this settle down? And also, by the way, you know, instances of domestic violence are up.
Right.
And emotional abuse and financial abuse, because we, you know, women are in a lot more dangerous situations right now in the, you know, DV world. So that's really important to look at as well.
Well, and anxiety and depression diagnoses and symptoms are skyrocketing right now. So, add that mental health issues. They say that's going, even when we get past the pandemic of COVID, there will be a pandemic of mental health
Long
issues.
haul. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I really feel like it's like the grass is always greener, especially now during the pandemic.
Right.
So I found myself, being single, really kind of like envious of people who had families at home, especially when it was like full-time lockdown, and it was just me and my daughter going crazy. And I would look at couples and I'd be like, well, whatever you think, at least you have somebody to like hug and kiss. You know what I mean? Like, but then my friends who are married are like, are you kidding me? Can I trade with you? Can you take my husband? Jesus. Like, and I just realized that like everybody wants what the other person has in this when it was locked down, because everybody was stressed and nothing felt right.
And I guess that's sort of my question is that how do you differentiate? I mean, everybody has their cross to bear, or this pandemic or the world, financial, romance, all the bad stuff sort of gets miracle grow sprinkled on it, and I love what you said about a release. Like, if you can't have that release and you can't travel for work or you can't go out with your friends, like, what is real of a bad relationship and what is sort of circumstantial? And would the dust, or not the dust though, but would a normal existence, be different in the relationship? I mean, Susan, I don't know what obviously seen an uptick.
Oh yeah. I mean, unfortunately, we're seeing a huge uptick in outreach from clients, and it's not just new divorces, but it's the ones that have already happened. Now couples are experiencing all the post dissolution issues with the loss of jobs and income and parenting. If you thought you didn't co-parent well beforehand, now the pressure of the pandemic and the questions and the issues raised by the pandemic that are very serious in many cases around health and other issues are really driving a divide between people. But if you think about some of the, like the number one stressor in a marriage that's brought people to my office over the years has usually been something around finances. That is probably the number one reason I see people's marriages get to a stress point that breaks it. And if you think about the financial situation that's happening for people as we go through COVID, that people are losing their jobs, losing their incomes, it's impacting the finances, the stress that's being put on relationships in very traditional or very normal ways, but just the additional layer of stress. I just think once the relationship is already starting to break, it's being accelerated through this process. And once people have made up their mind that that's where it's going, I think Kate probably sees this. Once people go through that limbo period of time of, do I want to stay or do I go? Once they decide to go, even if they can't physically go, they're gone. And the hard part here is going to be actually getting gone, because you can't get into court and you can't get papers filed, and you have limited avenues of escape at the moment.
So basically you're saying once a cucumber becomes a pickle, it can never become a cucumber again?
Exactly. You can't take the vinegar out.
Right, Ben. That's exactly what we're saying.
That's like we were thinking, because there's a lot of search around should I get divorced, and we're trying to do more quizzes on site, and our quiz team was like, why don't you do a quiz of should I get divorced? And I was laughing as somebody who's been divorced. I'm like, the answer should be like, if you are here, yes.
Well, that's what I always say. By the way, Julie, that is like literally my wheelhouse, right? And
should I stay or should I go is literally her thing.
Yeah, right. Yes.
Right. And so
give her a call.
The thing that I always say is people are like, how many people how many of your clients actually tend to get divorced? And I'm like, well, look, if you are up at 3:00 in the morning Googling, should I stay or should I go? You're probably not in a happy marriage.
Right. Yeah. All signs point to.
Yeah. Right. You're probably looking for permission and information and to know that you're not alone. Right. So I 100% agree with you.
Julia,
and that's the answer.
in the COVID loop, We're going to stay a little bit in the COVID loop, and you know, the topic is divorcing right to parent right, and you and your ex, how has, because you guys handled it like adults, and you know, it came around the singleness of purpose and the love of your daughter, how has that helped through this COVID thing and parenting and later on after?
Yeah, you know, I was felt so lucky that I get along with my ex through this, because at the very start of it, I was actually in London and Paris literally March 7th, and I flew back March 17th. So like when I left, I was going on vacation. When I came back, I was like running away from a pandemic to another pandemic. And so while I was there, they put down the whole quarantining thing, which I got very upset about because I wondered whether that meant I would see my daughter. But of course, everyone was in the same boat anyway. But my ex was so flexible and lovely about it. He was like, no, like we're gonna kind of like have two bubbles. Luckily, we're walking distance. Again, so glad that we're walking distance because through all this, right? Because you know, when the subways were shutting down and everything. And so we were able to kind of merge our two households, even though obviously we're not like one household, but we just figured we could walk back and forth between our two apartments and just have like our bubble. And so we kind of just, it was more just you know, you're okay, I'm okay. What's the difference between one household where we'd be all together and just having these two households, and we're not exposing ourselves to anything else. This was early in the pandemic. And so just the very fact, I thought about that, and if if it had been contentious, or if we had not gotten along, it could have easily been something that he would have been like, you were in Paris and London having fun, like, no, you're not seeing your daughter for 2 weeks. And like, I heard about that happening, people taking advantage of COVID and the lockdown to mess with, you know, custody arrangements, and that's terrifying. Or to get full custody. And so again, I just feel like it's a perfect ample opportunity for parents who for exes to really fight over custody. And I just felt so lucky to have that friendly relationship. So we've just been basically continuing as normal. And even talking now, like I was thinking about going away, and he was like, well, it's because New York's just gone over to the testing instead of quarantining. And he's like, well, that would be okay with me. And, you know, it's you know, I just feel grateful throughout all this that we've both been so flexible, but it took that platform of being flexible in our relationship before to work so well in COVID, but it was so important.
Yeah, and again, another example of divorcing right and putting your kids first, and you know, swallowing in pride or whatever that led to. And Nikki and I in the same situation. You know, we live walking distance, 7 houses apart, and when the pandemic, you know, the lockdown happened, we sat down as a family, not that perfect family that you see on Instagram, but our perfect family. And, you know, we had a discussion of how things were going to look and how we were going to behave as adults in this world of pandemic. And we were lock, step, and barrel. And what that led to was a little bit opening up of our lockdown, of our quarantine. Nikki's house, my house, dinners, you know, I mean, it expanded. So we put our son first. And in the long run, it helped us and helps us, not just through pandemic, but in general life, easier and softer. You know, Susan, I know we've talked a lot about the pandemic and the not just pandemic, but these you had mentioned earlier about the custody agreements and the changing. Is that more what you're seeing now, or is it new divorces or amendments to agreements?
No, now it's actually more new divorces, I would say. Early on in the pandemic, unfortunately, we saw quite a bit of what Julia was just mentioning, where parents who did not have a positive co-parenting relationship saw an opportunity, whether they knew they were manipulating the situation or not. There was a great deal of it. That was a very common situation. And what ended up happening is a lot of judges did come down on that, did not favor it. The judges never favor anyone changing the court orders without their stamp of approval. And it's to a certain degree, I think we've all settled into an understanding of what boundaries we can have around our bubbles or pods. So most families have worked out those situations, although I do know families where parents have not seen their children for months now because the other parent will not return the children because they have a job in an industry, which is, they're in the medical industry or something like that, or they have someone else living in the house who is. So there are still those cases, and unfortunately, there's not a lot of legal recourse available. And the problem is those children are not having access to their other parent, and that is just harmful to those children. And that's not going to end well for anybody, but it is an unfortunate thing. But now, honestly, I mean, we are seeing a huge influx of people making inquiries about how do I get divorced during the pandemic. That's probably one of the most asked questions I get on my divorce site.
And Kate, anything you're seeing in particular, or how it's changed?
Well, I mean, I think there's so many people who are living together, separated for extended periods during COVID, and there are sort of, drawbacks. There's pluses and minuses to that, right? One of them is that you get this other person in the house to co-parent, to pass back and forth during, online school and work and all of that stuff, right? But on the other side of that, women people are sort of locked together. I work with women, so those are the stories I hear. But people are locked in together in really uncomfortable and sometimes, not safe environments, and are really having to work hard on, what are the boundaries here? What's reasonable? What's not reasonable? And, how to co-parent under the same roof while separated for the foreseeable future.
I mean, look, I love my ex-wife, but if we had to, when I say we expanded, our quarantine or our bubbles, like we're 7 houses apart. If I had to live in the same house with her,
right?
I mean,
oh yeah.
And I would say, my ex and I, we sort of have a similar setup where he's also remarried, and his wife has an ex-husband, right? So there are 3 kids that go back and forth in all of these, various, blended family. And, my ex is definitely doing things that I would consider more high risk, but I can't control it. I can come to him and say, hey, this makes me uncomfortable, or this makes me nervous, or, I want you to consider that when you make a choice like that for yourself, you're actually making it for the entire blended family. And sort of plant that seed, but I can't control it.
Right.
I can't make him stop, and
you tried that while you were married, right?
Yeah.
Look at that look. That's the first bad look I've ever gotten.
The ex-husband look.
The controlling one in that marriage, I just want to say. Just for the record.
Just for the record, because he's not here to defend.
Exactly. He would probably be like, really sure about that? All right, I was fine. But we both were. So, but I mean, I can't, I literally, and part of my divorce, my unspoken agreement in divorce is that not only can I not control him anymore, or even I don't have a say. It's none of my fucking business, and I can tell him how it affects me and how it impacts me and where it concerns me. But at the end of the day, it's none of my business. It's not my problem anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not my problem. I love that.
No, not my fucking job. That's
That's her famous. That's another one of Kate's
tagline.
I love it. Julia, in We Are Family, your podcast, it's how many episodes in are you?
12 was the first season, and then we're going to do a second season in the spring.
So it's not the whole thing isn't just about co-parenting and divorce, but explain, maybe we've, I think, or at least I tend to focus on that ideal of the perfect family, we talk about man and woman and son or daughter, but there's so many other things in life today and so many other intricacies that we don't really cover. And some of the hurdles or burdens that those families, whether it be, same-sex marriages, trans daughter or some, whatever, there's just so much more.
Yeah, no, totally. So my co-host Sean T, and part of the reason, I love, he is just
Sean
so.
T, like the Sean T I'm thinking of?
Yes, Sean T from the Insanity Workout. Yes. Oh my God.
I've been working out with him for years.
Okay, yeah, he loves that, and he's just such a breath of fresh air, just like so motivational, so wonderful. But I loved having him as a co-host because his story was so different from mine. So he's married. Him and his husband Scott had twin boys through surrogacy, and they're just like so loved up in their relationship. But our stories were totally different, but like our families looked so different, but like both different families to what you might describe as like a traditional family. So. He talked about his experience working with a surrogate, and the challenges with that. But then, we had all different kinds of stories. Ali Sheedy was on the podcast for the Breakfast Club, and her son Beckett is transgender, and she talked about that, like just real honest way of being a parent to a son who's transgender, and like what she had to learn. And she's just so kind of candid. She's so candid because she talks about just how, like, at first she thought it was Beckett's responsibility to tell her everything, but then she realized no, like it was her. Beckett was grown up, and it was her responsibility to go out there and learn about it, and not put the burden on Beckett. So just really kind of like some really wonderful thoughts from her. We also we did an episode on fostering. So this guy. Literally Guy, his name's Guy Bryant. He lives in Brooklyn, and he's fostered over 50 teens, and they all call him Pop, and they'll call him at like 2:00 in the morning if they're in, just to tell him if they're thinking of him, or maybe if they're in trouble. Like he's like and it's like open door policy. Like he's just such a lovely, lovely person, and he's like it's no thing. Like he's just like, and I was like, how do you? Oh my God, like, wow, like hero. And he's like, nah, I'm not a hero. Like, this is just what I do. Like, so really helpful.
50 at one time?
Hero.
50 over time, but then like not at one time, but I think he had at least like, he'd have like a house full of kids at any one time. Yeah. Where he was like,
wow. That is a hero.
He is a hero.
Yeah.
Love him.
Yeah. So that was my goal, just to highlight all different families. We also interviewed people who were a single mom by choice, which is, again, like you don't have anybody to co-parent with when you're a single mom by choice, and like just kind of in awe of her, especially because we interviewed her during the pandemic and she was working full time and had her kid at home, and that's a whole nother story. Like, I mean, just juggling all that when you're a single parent and then you have nobody to tag team with at all. So yeah, basically just all different stories of different families and different shapes and sizes. So it was fun.
I love it.
Yeah.
That's so cool. And again, if you missed the beginning of it, somehow she has magical powers that got me to shut the hell up and, her and Sean and actually tell our story in, I think, 35 minutes or something, which,
It's probably also thanks to a producer who's very good at keeping people on time.
I had to make you 2 episodes.
I know. Well, you were one of the first. So I just didn't know anything about, getting to the point, and I still don't. But somehow, We Are Family got it right.
Yeah.
That's great.
So I just had a question and I completely forgot it. I don't know if the states that Kate, Susan, that you mediate for, but it's always been a question of like same-sex marriages and the states that it's legal, and I guess it's legal around the country now, but
It is. Hopefully it will stay that way.
Hopefully it'll stay that way. But where the divorce process, I mean, we see some of the same things, or is it? I know it's romance and finance, but some of the intricacies that go on with that you see.
With same-sex families?
Mm-hmm.
There can be additional complications. Julia just legally, only because, as Julia just mentioned, with Sean's family, they may have a situation where we have a biological parent and a non-biological parent. And when that family divorces, there can be issues around parentage and co-parenting and custodial situations that are not part of the traditional legal framework. And frankly, our judicial system, our legal system has not caught up with the many permutations of family that exist in the world today. And so that has caused issues for families. And unfortunately, it means that when you have children or you enter into a same-sex marriage and then have children in that marriage, you may need to enter into additional legal agreements as a part of the marriage to protect parental rights in the event that the marriage is not successful. So it adds certain layers, and there's certainly, I mean, I've in the last several years issues around frozen embryos, frozen genetic material, cord blood, all different things. That's now a very routine part of divorces. So medical science has moved way beyond the traditional family, thankfully, because I think it's beautiful that Julia is highlighting all the many permutations of family that we have in this world. And it's unfortunate because our legal system isn't there yet.
Interesting. And sorry for the layman questions, just kind of blow me away, but isn't there yet? Is there a move, or is there some states that are acknowledging it or realizing it or even changing the laws?
There was, I believe, a case.
I know you don't practice in all 50 states, and I know you're good, but
when you do practice in a state, you don't know every law that ever came down. But in this particular area, I do believe there was so this is not necessarily being led by the legislature. This is being led by case law. So as the families find themselves in court, they're cases of first impression, as we call them legally, because they're issues of law that have not been decided, and the law doesn't have a tiebreaker for them. So each state will have different opinions, different rulings on different issues. So until the only way to have a countrywide law is that good old Constitution, and we don't amend it very often. Or add amendments to it. So as of right now, it would depend on what state that you're in. I do think California recently had a decision, I would say within the past year, where we had a same-sex couple. One was biological, one was not, and both parents were actually biological mother, biological dad, and non-biological dad were held to all three be equal parents, which is kind of groundbreaking in and of itself. I think it was California. I could be wrong on the state, but it was certainly a groundbreaking decision because it essentially created a family of three parents, three legal parents.
Amazing. Good.
I know the ADD band just sort of squirrel ran across my desk, and I got a little diverted on this topic. But to get back to the topic we were talking about, I know we're almost running out of time. But Julie, with your digital presence with parents and the stuff you post, whether it be a article or something about co-parenting, what are some of the I guess with the comments or the reactions that could be hurdles to divorcing right and parenting right, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think sometimes I've written personal essays, and we'll post things about divorce and co-parenting, and you'll still get the kind of like hurtful comments from people who think that families should stay together no matter what. And I think sometimes, like, just putting myself out there as an editor who has a podcast and is very vocal about divorce and co-parenting, and that's kind of like, I feel like I was saying earlier, it's good to be an open book and be as honest as possible, because I sort of feel like it's my duty to help anyone else who might be in a similar situation. But it does kind of open you up a little bit to be vulnerable to comments from people. And, we're still all human. And it's like, you don't want to read the comments, but then you sort of still do. And you know that they don't really know what they're talking about. And, I'm very strong in my convictions and the reason why I'm doing everything and how important it is to divorce right and co-parent right. And also, I do firmly believe that you should not stay together.
Right.
We all, I mean,
For the kids.
Yeah.
For the kids. That's
yeah, for the kids.
Let me out.
So, you kind of have to be like water off a duck's back a little bit. And I continue to just try to present the topic in a way that's palatable to people who might not understand it, you know, trying to realize that people might still just think about divorce in one specific way and need to be educated about co-parenting. So, you know, that's sort of what we try and continue to do. And
I think it's great, you know, the idea of educating people, even if, you know, such a big platform like Parents, you know, is that who's going to be reading it, but but the idea that if, you know, just the idea that it can be different, right? Or that it can be, even if you never get divorced, but if you have in the back of your head, because I had the idea, you know, I was a child of the 80s, you know, my parents got divorced and it was, you know, One Way, and it was War of the Roses, a great movie, you know, and it was war. And so that's what, you know, what I knew. I don't think my parents knew any different either. But with resources, what's that?
Yeah. They didn't know that it was different in the 80s. I mean, there were very few alternate paths. If you happened to be in California, in Southern California, there were a couple of mediators starting to break ground back then, but for the most part, that litigation model is all we've ever had.
Unless you were Gabrielle Hartley's parents.
Yes.
Well,
right.
Her parents were like the forefathers of co-parenting.
They made it up. Yeah.
They invented it. Yes.
They did.
They invented conscious uncoupling.
They did. They did.
Well, Julia, you know, I always make a promise to Kate and Susan that I will only keep them an hour, and I'll keep I'll keep that same promise to you. Where can people reach you? Obviously, your podcast, We Are Family.
So, I'm Julia Dennison on Instagram. We also have @Parents is our handle on Instagram. If people want to follow that, and go to parents.com, and that's where I'm at.
It's a great podcast and a great platform. And your story, you know, using that to sort of further educate people is much appreciated here. And we want to thank you for that. Kate and Susan can be found there.
He uses pictures so he doesn't have to say it all again.
Every time.
The Divorce and Beyond podcast, as well as the Divorce Survival Guide podcast, are both award-winning, and both have had Nikki and I on as guests as well.
Yeah.
But thank you guys very much. Good luck to tomorrow. Hopefully the world will still be spinning after November 3rd. But you know, I think with one thing that everybody here sort of got right is singleness of purpose. You know, we talk about that a lot, and Nikki and I put our kid first. You know, Julia, you, every one of us did, and all that other stuff sort of got drowned out. So I think as a country, this isn't political, whoever you agree upon, if we can get back to singleness of purpose and we can get back to being, you know, one country, I think we will be much better off instead of us versus them. Mm-hmm. So with that,
we just need to co-parent the country.
Co-parent the country. Exactly.
Well done, Susan.
Drop! There you go. All right. Thank you guys. Good night.